Hi guys, so today I'm going to be doing a full moon, nice full moon on a kind of gradient background. So just to give you an idea of where we're going, here's a couple images of full moons that I pulled up. I really like this yellow one kind of down here, but I really loved the details in that guy. So I just looked up full moon with dark trees, and I'll tell you why. We're going to lay down a nice gradient background. We're going to go dark to light, just like this image here, so darkest at the top, lighter at the bottom, and then we're going to lay trees down in ink afterwards. A little bit of watercolor and then some ink just for definition, kind of like this picture here, how it sits in front. You could totally do mountains if you want to take it up a notch. For this tutorial, I'm just going to do the kind of gradient background though. And a gradient is anything that washes kind of from one side to the other. So you can see how dark and deep the color is on this side, and then lots and lots of water on this side. And we're going to keep the border loose, very similar to these swatches that I did, and very similar to this image here. If you want to square off your paper for a nice clean border, you totally can. I'm going to play around with this edge because I kind of like the way it looks. It's a little bit moodier, a little bit more witchy. So I've just given myself a really thin border because I'm going to do a loose border, but I want to be able to keep my page down. If I don't tape it down, it's going to warp, and then I'm going to get some funky lines. That'll be fine too. If you don't have tape, you can totally do it without tape for this tutorial. And then I have a couple of forms that I'm going to use. I was thinking I was going to use a quarter for one of the moons and just kind of lay it down and kind of get an idea with that, but I'm kind of thinking I might want to do a bigger moon with this guy, but this one's a bit big for me, so I think I'll stick with my quarter. Oops, that won't matter. I'll paint over it after. I'm going to stick with my quarter, and this one's right in the center, which I find a little less pleasing. This one's off center and this one's off center, so I think I'm going to do that as well. Kind of go like that. And then I'm just going to trace it, and basically I'm just leaving myself a bit of a safety zone so that I don't go over it. Now, when you're doing your gradient, it's totally fine. You can go around it without having to lay anything down. You could try putting a little bit of tape on the back of your quarter and put it here. You'd get a little bit of seepage around the edge still. Your best bet, if you wanted to keep a nice clean line, would be to use liquid Frisket or masking fluid, and that would give you a perfectly white, round, kind of dime-shaped or quarter-shaped circle afterwards. So that would be your best bet. It's totally manageable to go around it. You just have to be really careful when you're doing your gradient in your sky. And if a little bit gets in, not a big deal. You can always take it back with your cloth or your paper towel and just kind of erase it afterwards. So because we're going to go in with like either a darker blue or a yellow, it doesn't matter. If you were using liquid Frisket, you could really go in with whatever color you want because it would look super clean. If you're not using liquid Frisket, I would maybe suggest doing your moon in the same color that you're doing the background in, just darker tones, because that way if anything gets in the edges, it's not a big deal. And here's an example sort of a moon I did a couple weeks ago. It's not perfect. It's not a perfect circle. I used the bottom of a glass, like the small part of the bottom of a glass to create that one. And what I did is I actually just dipped it in a little bit of water with some color and then dipped it back on. So you could totally do that with, for example, like the lid of my liquid Frisket. I could do that as well. And that would give me kind of this dappled look. It's like when you leave a ring from your coffee or your tea on top of something. So I'm going to get started. I think this looks good to me. I'm going to try it without the liquid Frisket just to show you how, but basically what you would do if you were using Frisket is you would just lay down the liquid Frisket in this entire circle, and then we would peel it off afterwards. So let's begin. We're going to start with just a bit of water, really easy. Lay the water down and just kind of give myself a bit of an edge, and you're going to ignore that quarter size space, right? Because we're not going to be going in there. You're just laying down a bit of saturation because we're going to be doing a technique called wet on wet. And that'll basically be taking our color, which is wet, and placing it on top of the paper, which is wet. You want to make sure there's lots and lots of water for it to move through. And I want this rough edge. I kind of don't want it to be perfect all the way down. And you can see because my water is there, watercolor will go wherever the water is. So you can just let it flow. Don't worry too much if it's not perfectly uniform or it's not quite the tone you want in the right area. Really easy way to pick some of that back up is just by using your cloth or your paper towel. See how easy that was to pick up? And then I've got these plexiglass shields that I pull from my IKEA frames. I don't really like how they look when I put my watercolor behind them, so I pull them out and I use them for projects. I usually go to the Value Village or the thrift store and get old frames, and I pull the glass out of them, and then I put those in my IKEA frames because I don't actually mind the IKEA frame itself. I just don't like that they started framing with plexiglass. It just looks really unprofessional with the watercolor behind it. There. Might have to go in and just, and see how the edge of my circle isn't perfect? That's fine. It's really not going to make a big difference at the end. And we can clean up those edges on the flip side, so just get it as close as you can. If there's one area, like over here, I've got a bit of an edge. And right there. There we go. Nice. And I might just go in with the blue color afterwards too. I might not do like a yellow like I was thinking. And it can be kind of lighter up here. It doesn't have to be perfect. Where the absolute lightest part is at the bottom, you can invite some of that lightness up towards where the moon is. After all, that's your light source. That's where some of the light will be coming from. So I'm even just going to take back just a little of that color to make it look like it's casting a beam throughout my forest. And the part that's going to matter kind of the least is this bottom part, because we're going to cover it up with trees at the end anyway. So I'm just bringing that down. I really like this kind of moodier edge along this side. I wish I had maybe been a little more patient along my other side, but I kind of like both sides. So I'm just going to pull in a bit more of that indigo across the top. Nice. Good. Nice and dark along those edges. A little bit lighter along some other edges. You just want interest is what you're looking for. You don't really need it to be perfect. When you pull everything down, you make it all perfect. It has a tendency to look a little fabricated and a little bit fake. I think having some of these areas like here, over here, where it's not quite uniform, where it's not perfectly blended, is actually a little bit more successful. And now if we could do a time lapse, we would. And if I had a little bit of extra time, I would let this dry completely, just to make sure that all of the color lays down where we need it to. I really don't need to do anything else in this for the time being. And so for just a few minutes, I'm going to talk about some supplies that I work with, and some of the things that I have in front of me so that you guys have an idea. And that way I'm going to give it some time to dry. If you want to fast forward to the next step, you totally don't have to listen to me. So today, and this is the kit that I work with most of the time, but today I'm working with my limited palette kit. This one has purple, a bit of a red color. This one's kind of an ochre, golden yellow, and then a lemon yellow. I really do stress the importance of having two different types of yellow, a cadmium warmer yellow and a cooler yellow. The cool yellow was really especially useful if you followed along with my lemon tutorial, because you need that kind of cool color to be able to balance out the lemon and create shadow. I have two different colors of green, like a sap green and then a deeper green for forests and things like that. If ever I need, I usually just end up mixing in a little bit of blue. And blues are the one shade you kind of can't make. So this is also another area that I stress. I usually keep an indigo, more of a sky blue, like a cerulean or something that's a little bit lighter, and then kind of a deeper teal or turquoise. I really like the phthalos. And they kind of come out of this range, and you've got like these really inky, beautiful blues. Here, I'll show you this one. It's my favorite. I go through it a lot, but it's this really beautiful kind of inky colored blue, but not as dark as the indigo that we've been using for this project. You can kind of see the difference there. And then here's an example of here, I'm going to wipe this off just so you can see. the sky blue. And this one's nice because it's quite transparent. It's got a really cool transparent color compared to the more pigmented and maybe even slightly synthetic color that I have over here with this kind of phthalo shade. So both are really useful for painting landscapes, especially if you have a reflection, something that's on the top and something that's on the bottom. I like to use two different blues so that I'm not using the same blue in both parts of the painting and it looks confusing. So I use two different colors. Over here I've made a bit of a rust, and then usually over here is where I collect my indigo. This one's nice too because as the colors run, they pool at the bottom, which means I can keep them and keep using them. And then up here I use for my mixing. So this is a nice little 12 color kit, just a Medine watercolor palette. You can get these at the Paint Spot or at the Gilded Rabbit, both of which are open right now. So if you are needing supplies, they are open for business, and basically you just call ahead and they'll put your order together, and then you drive up and you just pick it up, and that's it. Two of my favorite watercolor brushes are these kind of filbert ones. Honestly, these were from the dollar store maybe, but I usually indulge in getting myself a couple of nice ones a year to use with watercolor because it's nice having the nice tip on them, and the tip usually wears out really quickly. I also invest usually in a really nice angle brush. I didn't use this one this time, but this is a 1/2 inch gold sable angle brush, and this one I got at the Paint Spot. I think it was maybe $11 or $12 and worth the investment. It's a really nice versatile brush. And then I have a water brush, and I'm still learning how to use these, so I didn't use it this time, but the water is contained in it, so you don't have to keep going back to your reservoir. It's all contained. Really nice for travel, especially if you have these two things together. I always work with a 2H pencil because it's the hardest lead. It makes the lightest marks, and if you're marking in behind your watercolor, quite often the watercolor will cover most of this and just leave you with a very, very hint of a line, which is really nice because then you're not having to cover it up with paint. And then today I've got this white charcoal, and you'll see why later. We're going to work with it a little bit in the moon just to create some craters and some different texture and that kind of thing. I also mentioned liquid frisket earlier, which also goes by the name masking fluid. This is really nice to work with if you're trying to save space, like a cloud or a moon, something like this. You place it down. It essentially applies just like white glue. It hardens completely into this kind of jelly-like substance or like rubber cement, and then you just roll it off with your thumb. If your page is too wet, you will tear your page, so make sure that this is completely dry before you start painting, and make sure that your paper is completely dry before you start removing. If that makes sense. Okay. Oh, and then lastly, I wanted to show you guys these really quickly. I love getting these little Winsor Newton watercolor books. These are postcards. So you can actually just like throw a stamp on them, put somebody's address on it, and write them a little note. And that's my plan with this one today. This one's going to go to a friend. So they come in a pack of 15. They're pre-cut. They're really easy. Obviously, this is a little bit more of an expensive option. They end up being about maybe a little less than $1 a piece when you buy them in a book like this. But really nice to be able to do studies on. And then, hey, you've got a gift for somebody. And these also fit really nicely in those smaller IKEA frames. Because they're a 4x6. So, and yeah, you can see here 4x6. I think they come in 5x7 as well. But I like these little sizes. They're perfect for small projects. Okay, so that's as good as that's going to get for now. You can see that some of this edging came in here, and watercolor always dries a little bit lighter than what you laid down. So I'm going to go back in just with a little bit more of this color that I created for myself up here, just because I want to make sure I get that really moody color. And if you don't want to do another layer, you totally don't have to. I'm just going to do one just at the top, just to bring that color down a little bit more. And if you ever need to blend out and you're like, oh, I have too much color, water is your friend. That's always going to help you blend it out. Water and your paper towel or cloth. I've been trying to go zero waste lately, so I'm using a cloth today. I just wash them with my regular rags and everything that I wash in the laundry, and they come out relatively clean, and away I go. Paper towel is indispensable though. There's definitely some projects with watercolor that you can't mistake it. You have to have paper towel for the project, especially for picking up paint or for creating texture. But I find most of the time I can get away with just a cloth. Bring that down just a bit. I'm going to leave the bottom because I want to shade my trees in right away, not make you guys wait again. So I'm just going to leave that part. And there, my cloth kind of did some of that work for me, so that's nice. There. And like I said, I'm going to leave that halo. I really like what we did there with that bit. Do as I say, not as I do. There we go. And I left a lot of paint. There's quite a bit of paint just sitting up here soaking into the page, but I kind of like how moody those clouds are now. That's nice. So because my page is a little bit wet, instead of going in with ink, I'm going to go in with a smaller brush to layer my trees in. Get that wet, give myself a bit of a tip. And I'm going to use exactly the same colors that we've been using this whole time. I'm not going to change anything. Essentially, this makes this a monochromatic piece because I'm using the same indigo color for the whole thing. And again, don't be perfect. Don't worry about, how this is being applied. Don't worry about how much paint or if the angles are a little funny. These trees are going to be your trees, and they'll look the way that you want them to. I kind of like the look of these pine trees here myself. The tops of those, so I'm going to bring them down. This guy I'm going to bring down a little more too. And you want these to be quite dark. And like I said, we're going to go in with the watercolor first, and then we'll go in with a bit of ink after for the details. Nice and dark. So you're using quite a bit of paint with this step here. You want to bring it down to the bottom, but not go beyond the edge. And leave some white, maybe go a little smaller on one edge than the other. This side's a little damp still, so I'm just gonna do a little guy. And then start filling in some of the other ones if you want. Again, there's no wrong way. Nice. Now I'm just adding lines because I've already added the details in with my trees, but to make it give the illusion of more of a forest, I'm just gonna add in some more lines. There we go. And I kind of like how it's concentrated centrally. My moon's a little bit off center. The rest of my trees are in one area like that. Good. I'm happy with that for now. Because we're going in with the ink later, I don't really see any need to go in with more detail than that. So I'm just going to lay those down. You can see I left lots of white or negative space in behind those trees too. I didn't go in with too much detail because that creates some really nice depth, I find. Some of these are a little lighter, so I had a little bit more water on my brush, and some are a little darker. That also creates a bit of that push and pull. And now I feel like we're ready to go into the moon. So because I did leave myself a pretty good clean line, there's kind of one little edge there that I'm just going to smooth out just a touch. You don't want to go into the background too much or it's going to show, but that's okay. And I'm going to try this kind of milky white color, but what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add just a bit of this red too, because it's a pink moon tonight. And I'm kind of wondering if I add some blue. Oh, my red's a little too rusty. That's okay. You can see there the color's not really what I'd like. So I'm going to try this milky color for the moon. And I'm just going to go in with just a tiny, tiny bit of white, or yellow rather, and lots of water. And there's some of my blue got in there naturally from my water. That's fine, because we don't want it to be very, very pigmented at all. In fact, like most of what we're going to be using to lay it down is water. And if you're ever in doubt, always just change your water. I know for me, I sometimes work past the point of no return, where I'm kind of like, I probably should have changed my water out by now. And so that's always a good thing to do, especially if you're trying to achieve a certain color like we are here. You may want to just switch out your water really quickly. What I'm going to do actually just to achieve that is use my water pen, because everything in here is clean already. There we go. You can see when I squeeze, there's a reservoir right here, and then the water comes out in droplets. That's kind of what you're looking for to make sure that brush is saturated. Perfect. I'm just going to pick up a little paint, and we're not going to cover the whole thing. Your instinct might be to cover it all in. We really want to keep as much of that white as possible, and so I'm just going to go in and dance a bit of the color around. Nothing too crazy. Just giving it a bit of that moon glow color that we're kind of looking for. And I'm dotting it. I'm really not like brushing like this. I'm kind of just going like that with my brush around the edges. And you don't want to, if your page is still wet and you touch that blue with the yellow, it's going to bleed in right away. It's going to go and get sucked right into where the water is. So I'm being really careful because I didn't wait. And if you didn't wait, you'll want to be really careful too. But if you waited for your page to dry, or you used a hair dryer or something like that, then you're probably safe. So that's the first layer of my moon. I'm going to let that dry completely and give it a little bit of time. The next color that I think I'm going to go in with, I can see that there's a bit of like kind of that rusty color. So I actually don't mind this rust that I made. I'm going to kind of start dotting that in and leaving the yellow where it is, and just putting a bit of this darker color on top. And you can see it kind of wants a spider web right away. Don't resist the urge to try to blend it. Don't make it uniform. Just let it sit where it's sitting. Leave a bit of a white space. Imagine that there's one spot on the moon that's completely white, so you don't paint it at all. You don't fill it in at all. And you leave that just kind of dabbled like that. And again, I'm just dotting the color in. I'm not shading it, if that makes sense. Now I'm going in with a slightly darker hue. And I'm going to add in, see when I add that yellow in, it just goes, completely moves out of the way. Really nice. I have a bit of a blossom here on the edge. That's just from too much water with my brush, but we can go in and fix that afterwards. We don't want to do it right now. I'm going to leave that moon. I'm kind of happy with that effect. And now I'm going to go in with my Micron pen here and just give myself a little extra detail on these trees. You'll see this one's 0.5. I'm going to use my 0.2. It's just a little finer. There we go. And I'm just adding in some dots and a little bit of shading, maybe some trunks and some extra line work. You could do a little bit of hatching. Hatching is when you go one way and then the other way. If you wanted to add some texture to that bottom part there, I'm adding a little bit of dots like snow is what I'm kind of imagining. And I'm going to add some detail in to some of these trees that I didn't add any into before, but I kind of like how creepy they look, so I don't want to lose too much of that quality. Good. Okay, and I mentioned this little blossom here, easily fixed. We're just going to go in with a little bit of extra paint and then bring it down. We'll do a last kind of sweep. You can see how the page really just took all of that paint that I gave it. That really, really dark spot at the top that almost seemed impossibly dark. has all but soaked up into the page. It's all gone, basically. All that color just got absorbed, which is what happens when you have really good quality paper. Usually it'll just keep taking it. So that's okay. I'm going to go back in and I'm being really careful, you guys. I cannot stress enough how much getting up to get a cup of tea or something will benefit this piece overall. I'm rushing it because I'm trying to show you before the video is done. So just pulling all of this color down, and I'm avoiding touching those edges because if I do, it's gonna bleed right away and you'll see it, and then that'll really suck because I'll have to tell you why, which is that I just rushed it, because patience is probably the most difficult ingredient in watercolor. Or at least I find it the most difficult. All right, good. That's my last kind of coat of the dark, and I'm pretty happy with that actually. I'm gonna do just one tiny bit of this kind of red color in here, just because I want a bit more drama up in my moon. And if you had some pink acrylic that you wanted to use on this moon today, you could totally wait until this is dry and add it in. Same with a bit of white acrylic. I would also stress that white charcoal is beautiful as well. So I might do that, I think, once mine starts to dry a little bit better here, is I might add in some of the white charcoal. So when I post the final picture, I'll show you guys the difference between the two. So that's our gradient sky with a nice big April full moon. Here's hoping that spring is finally here, guys. I'm hoping those gusts of wind and the melting snow are an indication, and I hope everyone's keeping really safe, and we'll see you next time.